We all watched the devastating fallout when the news broke that Cassius had supposedly met his grim end, leaving Britt throwing violent tantrums in her jail cell and Nina completely heartbroken, mourning the loss of the man she thought was her beloved friend all over again. The tears were real, the grief was heavy, and the town genuinely believed that the dark cloud of his deception had finally dissipated. But let us be real for a moment, ladies. In this dramatic town, a body bag is usually just a temporary sleeping bag, especially for someone with his notorious, highly resilient bloodline. The unconfirmed leak currently circulating among the crew suggests that his death was nothing more than a brilliantly orchestrated illusion. It seems like the writers are not quite finished with his redemption arc, and high chances are that the mysterious and infinitely powerful WSB head, Z, is the grand architect behind this massive, town-wide deception. Z is a man who plays a complex game of chess while everyone else is merely playing checkers, and he rarely lets a highly valuable, highly skilled asset simply expire if he can use them to his ultimate advantage in the field. When we look back at the final, chaotic days of Cassius before his supposed demise, we did not see a one-dimensional, mustache-twirling villain hell-bent on pure destruction and chaos. Instead, we witnessed a deeply conflicted, tormented man who was desperately trying to clean up the catastrophic mess he had made of his life and the lives of those around him. He took massive, life-threatening risks, not to further his own selfish agenda or to gain power, but to try and right the wrongs of his past. He knew the walls were rapidly closing in on him, he knew his twin impersonation was completely falling apart, and yet, he did not run away like a coward when he had the perfect chance to escape. What if Z observed this exact behavioral shift from afar? What if Z realized that a reformed, highly capable operative with a dark past and a desperate, burning need for redemption is the exact kind of ghost agent the WSB desperately needs in their clandestine operations? The truth might be way more complicated than a simple villain getting his just desserts. It might actually be the thrilling origin story of a completely reborn, highly lethal secret agent. The behind-the-scenes whisper is that Z intentionally faked the death of Cassius to wipe his slate completely clean, erasing his criminal liabilities and pulling him deep into the impenetrable shadows of the WSB. By declaring him legally dead to the world, Z effectively neutralized the immediate threat of arrest, prosecution, and a lifetime behind bars, giving Cassius a blank canvas to work with. High chances are that Cassius has been hidden away in a secure, undisclosed underground location for months, undergoing intense rehabilitation, psychological evaluation, and rigorous technical training to become a fully sanctioned, off-the-books operative. It seems like this drastic storyline shift is meticulously designed to eventually bring him back to Port Charles, not as the deceptive imposter who broke Lulu and her fragile family, but as a legitimate, albeit highly secretive, agent of the law. But of course, in the dark and manipulative world of Z, absolutely nothing comes without a steep and often agonizing price, and the condition for his triumphant return is heavily tied to another major, unexpected player in this tangled web. That brings us to the incredibly complex, heartbreaking, and tragic situation involving young Jocelyn. We all know that Jocelyn is currently trapped in the suffocating, inescapable grip of the WSB, having secretly brokered a dangerous deal with Z to secure the freedom of Jason and Valentine. Carly went on an absolute rampage, storming into Z's secure office and furiously demanding that he release her daughter from her dangerous spy duties, but Z flatly refused, playing cruel mind games and making it crystal clear that Jocelyn's impressive skills belong exclusively to him now. During the absolute chaos of the Cold Fusion Project disaster, Jocelyn officially placed all the blame squarely on the shoulders of Cassius. She signed the official statements, she pointed the accusatory finger, and she painted him to the authorities as the sole mastermind behind the catastrophic, deadly events. But what if this was not an act of malice or vengeance on her part, but rather an act of desperate survival dictated directly by the WSB? The truth might be way more complicated than Jocelyn simply throwing Cassius under the bus to save her own skin or to punish him for his past transgressions. High chances are that the very moment Z officially declared Cassius dead, he explicitly and ruthlessly ordered Jocelyn to pin the entire Cold Fusion fiasco on the deceased man. After all, dead men tell no tales, they cannot defend themselves in a court of law, and they make the absolute perfect scapegoats for international espionage disasters. It seems like Jocelyn was left with absolutely zero choice in the matter. She was a helpless victim of Z's ruthless manipulation, forced to follow his strict, uncompromising directives to maintain her deep cover and fulfill her end of their secret, binding bargain. She had to publicly denounce Cassius to solidify her own standing within the agency, playing the role of the innocent, traumatized victim while secretly operating as one of Z's most valuable, highly trained undercover assets in the field. This hush-hush rumor suggests that when Cassius inevitably makes his grand, shocking, and highly anticipated return to Port Charles, he will do so under one absolute, non-negotiable condition from his new boss, Z. He must keep his mouth firmly shut about Jocelyn and her true allegiance. He will have to swallow his immense pride, accept the public narrative that he was the sole, evil villain behind the Cold Fusion project, and allow the entire town to continue believing the absolute worst about those specific tragic events. What if Cassius agrees to this agonizing, isolating silence because he fully understands that Jocelyn is just as trapped, manipulated, and controlled as he is? He knows firsthand exactly how Z operates, how he twists vulnerable people into impossible corners, and he likely harbors absolutely no genuine ill will toward Jocelyn for doing what she had to do to survive the WSB's treacherous, unforgiving game of international chess. Imagine the incredible, suffocating tension of that hidden dynamic playing out on our screens. Cassius walking the familiar streets of Port Charles, bearing the heavy, crushing weight of a massive crime he did not solely orchestrate, all while secretly knowing that the young, seemingly innocent Jocelyn is actually a hardened, highly trained undercover operative working for the very man who holds his own leash. High chances are that they will share incredibly tense, unspoken moments of mutual understanding, a silent, knowing acknowledgement of their shared captivity under Z's oppressive thumb. It seems like the brilliant writers are setting up a fascinating, multi-layered parallel between the reformed, aging villain trying desperately to prove his worth and the Golden Girl slowly descending into the dark, morally ambiguous, and dangerous world of international espionage. Cassius will become the ultimate, silent keeper of her darkest secret, protecting her dangerous double life from a frantic Carly, who would undoubtedly lose her mind and burn the town down if she knew the full, terrifying extent of what her daughter was still doing for the agency. But the most compelling, undeniable evidence supporting this unconfirmed leak of Cassius's impending redemption arc is his profound, undeniably genuine, and deeply emotional connection with little James. If Cassius were truly a heartless, irredeemable, cold-blooded monster like his infamous father, he would have fled town the very second his cover was blown. He would have vanished into the dark night, prioritizing his own selfish survival above all else, leaving everyone in his destructive wake to pick up the shattered pieces. But he didn't do that. Instead, he took a massive, life-threatening risk just to keep a simple, seemingly insignificant promise to a child. He stayed behind, fully aware that the authorities, the WSB, and his enemies were rapidly closing in, just so he could take James to the batting cages to say a proper, meaningful goodbye. That is absolutely not the behavior of a sociopath. That is the unmistakable behavior of a man who has miraculously discovered a capacity for deep, unconditional, and selfless love. Think back to that incredibly emotional, tear-jerking scene at the batting cages right before Cody heroically swooped in to intercept what he mistakenly thought was a malicious kidnapping attempt. The raw, unfiltered emotion etched on the face of Cassius was palpable, heartbreaking, and entirely real. What if that specific, devastating moment was the ultimate turning point for his complex character? It seems like his pure love for James is the one untainted, beautiful thing in his otherwise chaotic, blood-soaked life. When a grown man is willing to sacrifice his own precious freedom to risk being locked away in a dark, damp cell for the rest of his natural life just to see a child smile one last time, it definitively proves that his soul is not entirely lost to the darkness. The truth might be way more complicated than anyone in town currently realizes. James might actually be the very anchor that pulls Cassius back from the endless abyss, giving him a tangible, breathing reason to fight for his redemption and prove to the world that he can finally be a good man. This deep-rooted, transformative love for James opens up a fascinating, entirely new, and highly controversial avenue for his future in Port Charles. In the past, Cassius was dangerously, unhealthily obsessed with Lulu, violating her sacred trust, infiltrating her home, and manipulating her fragile emotions in the most profound and disturbing ways imaginable. He barely spared a second glance from Maxie during that dark, deceptive period, viewing her only as a background character in his twisted fantasy. But the emotional landscape has completely and irreversibly shifted now that his profound connection with James has become the single most important thing in his entire life. High chances are that this unbreakable bond will inevitably draw him closer and closer to the boy's fiercely protective mother. What if the visionary writers are slowly, deliberately pivoting his romantic focus away from the toxic, irredeemable, and painful history he shares with Lulu, and steering him toward a completely unexpected, yet beautifully organic and healing relationship with Maxie? Maxie is a strong, resilient woman who has an incredibly long, well-documented history of seeing the hidden, buried good in broken, complicated, and deeply flawed men. She has a heart of absolute gold and a fiercely protective, maternal nature, especially when it comes to the safety and happiness of her children. If Cassius returns to town as a fully reformed WSB agent, actively and bravely working to take down real threats and proving his newfound loyalty to the side of justice, it seems like Maxie might be the absolute only person in town willing to give him a genuine second chance. Imagine the sheer emotional weight of Maxie quietly witnessing the genuine, tender, fatherly love Cassius harbors for her son. The behind-the-scenes whisper is that their shared, unwavering devotion to James will slowly become the solid foundation of a beautiful, slow-burn romance, one built carefully on forgiveness, profound redemption, and the shared, desperate desire to create a stable, loving, and safe environment for the child they both adore with all their hearts. A potential blended family dynamic consisting of Cassius, Maxie, and James would be an absolute masterclass in daytime soap opera storytelling. It takes a character who was once the ultimate, universally despised pariah and slowly, painstakingly integrates him into the warm, beating heart of a loving family unit. High chances are that Cassius will fight tooth and nail, bleeding and sweating, to prove to a skeptical Maxie that he is no longer the deceptive, cruel impostor who caused so much agonizing pain to her friends. He will undoubtedly use his powerful new position within the WSB to fiercely protect Port Charles, to protect her, and above all else, to protect James from any lingering shadows of his past. What if this new, reformed, and emotionally vulnerable Cassius becomes the steadfast, reliable, and fiercely loyal partner that Maxie has been desperately searching for all these lonely years? The truth might be way more complicated than a simple, fleeting romance. It could very well be the ultimate, epic story of a man literally coming back from the dead to earn the beautiful family he never, ever thought he deserved. Of course, a blossoming romance between the newly reformed Cassius and the beloved Maxie would send absolute, earth-shattering shockwaves through the entire judgmental town. Can you even begin to imagine the furious, explosive reaction? Lulu would likely go on an absolute rampage, utterly disgusted and horrified that Maxie would even consider letting the man who violated her life anywhere near her family. Britt would be completely torn down the middle between the sheer, overwhelming joy of having her brother miraculously back from the dead and the absolute terror of him inevitably breaking Maxie's fragile heart. The resulting drama would be absolutely delicious, serving as scenes of pure, unadulterated tension. It seems like the writers are brilliantly setting the stage for a massive, town-wide ideological war in Port Charles, with Maxie standing defiantly and proudly by the side of a reformed Cassius, fiercely defending his incredible hard-won transformation against a town that is stubbornly determined to judge him solely by his past sin. High chances are that this deeply emotional storyline will completely dominate our screens for months, providing endless emotional confrontations, tear-jerking family moments, and the kind of high-stakes, breathless romantic tension that keeps us glued to our televisions every single afternoon. But do not get too comfortable with the cozy idea of a peaceful, uninterrupted, happily ever after just yet, my friends. If there is one thing we know for absolute, terrifying certain about this town, it is that the dark past never truly stays buried, and the ruthless WSB always, without fail, comes to collect its bloody dues. When the presumed dead finally rise from their cold graves and step back into the blinding light, they always bring a torrential, destructive storm of dark secrets, buried lies, and unimaginable, lethal danger with them. Keep your eyes wide open and your doors locked, because the shadows are shifting, and someone very dangerous is watching from the dark.